On the distant planet Akris, where the ground shimmered with iridescent colors and the skies swirled with glowing energy, lived a hatchling named Dergen. Dergen was not like the other young ones of its kind. The other hatchlings had families, and they played together in the vibrant, bustling cities of Akris. But Dergen was different. There were no other hatchlings left to play with. The city of Akris, once alive with laughter and movement, had fallen silent over the centuries. The Acrisians, a race of beings who could control light and sound, had spread across the stars, leaving behind empty cities filled with forgotten memories. Dergen's family, like so many others, had disappeared long ago. The hatchling had wandered the deserted streets of the city for what seemed like an eternity, longing for the presence of others, yet finding none. Dergen was a young being with soft, shimmering skin that changed colors like the sunrise. It could create dazzling displays of light from its body and could produce haunting sounds that echoed in the empty halls of the city. But for all its abilities, Dergen was alone. The hatchling would play in the ruins, its light twisting and dancing around. But there was no one to admire its creations, no one to share the joy every day. Dergen would wander through the old streets, its tiny feet echoing on the ancient stone roads. It would visit the places where the other hatchlings used to play. There was the old playground with swings that had not moved in years. The colorful murals on the walls, faded and chipped with time, once depicted scenes of joy. But now they seemed sad and empty. Dergen would touch the murals with its small hands, hoping to feel the warmth of companionship. But all it received was cold stone. The loneliness in Dergen's heart was like a weight it could never shake off. It would often look up at the stars, wondering if its family was out there, somewhere in the vastness of space. Was it possible they still remember the little hatchling left behind? Or had they forgotten about it altogether? There were other hatchlings once, younger than Dergen, but they were long gone. Their laughter had once filled the air, their games of hide-and-seek and tag bringing life to the ancient structures. But now, the only sound that could be heard was the distant hum of the wind passing through the empty streets. Dergen would sometimes pretend to hear the laughter of the others, imagining their voices in the air, but it was only ever silence that answered Dot in the evening. As the twin moons of Akris rose into the sky, Dergen would sit at the edge of a cliff overlooking the ruins. The soft glow of the moons would cast long shadows, and the city below would look like a forgotten dream. It was beautiful, but it was lonely. One day, while walking near an ancient temple, Dergen's keen senses picked up a strange sound. It was faint at first, like the rustling of leaves in the breeze. But there was something different about it, something alive. Dergen paused, tilting its head in curiosity. The sound came again, louder this time. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the usual hum of the planet. It was something new, something strange. Dergen followed the sound cautiously, its small body moving silently through the ruins. The noise led it to a clearing near the base of an old, crumbling tower. And there, in the center of the clearing, Dergen saw something it had never seen before. It was a creature, not like any other Dergen had encountered. This being was smaller, fragile even. It had pale skin, dark hair, and was dressed in strange clothes that Dergen had never seen on any occasion. The creature was sitting on the ground, looking lost and confused. It was a human, though Dergen had no way of knowing this yet. The human child was sitting with its knees hugged to its chest, eyes wide and frightened. Dergen could sense that the creature was lost and alone, just like it. A strange feeling stirred in Dergen's chest, a feeling it had never known before: compassion. It approached the human cautiously, its glowing skin casting a soft light in the darkened clearing. The human looked up in surprise, their eyes locking with Dergen's. There was no fear in the child's eyes, only curiosity. The small human reached out a hand, as though trying to touch the glowing light of Dergen's skin. Dergen hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. The human was different, but Dergen could feel a strange connection. The hatchling stepped forward slowly, its light shifting in gentle waves of color. It didn't know why it felt compelled to do this, but it gently extended one of its hands, allowing the human to touch its skin. The contact was warm, and Dergen could feel something stirring within itself, a sense of joy it had not felt in years. The loneliness that had weighed so heavily on its heart seemed to lift, just a little. The human's hand moved up, tracing the light patterns that danced across Dergen's skin. The human made a soft sound, almost like a giggle, and Dergen felt a flutter of excitement. It was the first time in so long that someone, anyone, had reached out to it. The hatchling could not speak, for it did not know the words. But it could sense that the human was trying to communicate. Dergen began to show the human its abilities. It created swirling patterns of light that filled the clearing, lighting up the night. The human laughed and clapped, delighted by the display. Dergen felt its heart swell. For the first time, it had found someone to share its gifts with. As the hours passed, the two sat together in the clearing, the human fascinated by Dergen's glowing lights and gentle sounds. The hatchling didn't feel lonely anymore. There was something special about this small human. Even though they could not understand each other's language, they had found a way to communicate without words. It was as if they spoke the same language of light, of feeling, and of joy. Dergen realized that it no longer had to be alone. This small human, with their innocent wonder and curiosity, had come into Dergen's life at just the right moment. Together, they would learn to play again, to laugh, and to explore the ruins of Akris as if they were the only two beings left in the universe. And maybe, just maybe, this human would be the key to unlocking a new kind of family for Dergen, a family built not of blood, but of light, laughter, and connection. The next day, Dergen could not believe its own feelings. The hatchling had never known such joy before, a joy that came from the simple presence of another being. The human, whom Dergen had not yet named, was sitting on the ground in the clearing, its eyes wide with wonder as it gazed up at the glowing shapes that Dergen created. Dergen's light swirled and danced in the air, forming shapes and colors that had never been seen on Akris before. The human laughed, clapping its tiny hands in delight. Dergen watched with a warmth it had not felt in years. For a long time, the two simply sat together. The hatchling felt a bond with the human, a connection deeper than any it had ever experienced. It was not the same as the bond Dergen felt with its own kind, but it was something special, something unique. The human was so small, so fragile, yet it radiated energy and curiosity. A spirit that reminded Dergen of the playful hatchlings from long ago. The human child had a name. Dergen soon learned. It was Eli. The hatchling could not understand the human language, but it could feel the name in the way the human's voice seemed to brighten when it said it. Eli, in return, would point at Dergen and say something that sounded like a question. The hatchling could not understand the words, but it understood the feeling behind them. The human wanted to know more. Eli, Dergen said in its own way, the name spoken through its mind, not in words but in feelings. The human turned and smiled, his eyes sparkling with excitement. He pointed at Dergen, and then at the sky, asking another question. The hatchling tilted its head, trying to understand. It wanted to tell Eli about Akris, about the beauty and the silence of the planet. But the words would not come, so instead, Dergen reached out with its light, creating a swirling pattern in the air, depicting the stars that twinkled above them. Eli gasped, pointing at the swirling lights. Stars, he whispered, and Dergen nodded, even though it knew the human didn't fully understand. The hatchling had no words to explain the stars, the planets, or the history of Akris. It could only show Eli what it felt, and somehow, that was enough. The human child reached out, touching one of the floating lights with his small hand. Pretty, Eli said, grinning. The more time Dergen spent with Eli, the more it realized that this human was not just a visitor. He was something else, something Dergen had never expected. They didn't need to speak the same language to understand each other. Ellie's laughter and bright eyes told Dergen everything it needed to know. This was friendship. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ruined city of Akris, Dergen and Eli sat together on the grass. The quiet, empty city stretched out before them, but it no longer felt quite so lonely. Dergen had never known what it meant to have someone beside it, someone who didn't run away or treat it like an outcast. Eli didn't see the hatchling as different. Eli saw Dergen as a friend. In the evenings, the two would explore the city together. Dergen would create new light patterns, and Eli would follow, laughing as he tried to catch the floating lights. Sometimes, Eli would lead Dergen to small hidden places in the ruined secret pathways, forgotten staircases, and quiet courtyards filled with colorful flowers. Dergen had never noticed these places before, always too distracted by its loneliness to explore. One day, as they wandered deeper into the heart of the city, Dergen sensed something, a faint buzzing in the air. It wasn't just the wind, and it wasn't the usual hum of Akris. This was different. Something was changing. Dergen stopped in its tracks, its ears twitching, alert. Eli, who had been skipping ahead, turned back to see why the hatchling had paused. He walked toward Dergen, curiosity on his face. "What's wrong?" he asked in his soft, innocent voice. Dergen didn't answer. It couldn't, but its mind was racing. The hum grew louder, and the air around them seemed to ripple with energy. Something was coming. Suddenly, Dergen's sensitive skin tingled with an electric charge. The ground beneath their feet vibrated slightly. Eli looked around, clearly confused. "Dergen, what's happening?" he asked, his voice shaky. The hatchling's mind raced. The city of Akris, though long abandoned, was still connected to an ancient network, an old system that had been activated by a signal, one that had been dormant for centuries. That signal was now waking up. Dergen's instincts kicked in. It grabbed Ellie's small hand and pulled him toward a nearby building, hiding them in the shadow of a crumbling wall. Ellie's eyes were wide with wonder and fear. "Dergen, what's going on?" he repeated, his voice now filled with concern. Dergen didn't answer. It was too busy trying to understand what was happening. The humming grew louder, the vibrations stronger. Something was arriving, something from far away. Then, without warning, a bright light appeared in the sky, coming from the direction of the old spaceport. It was a ship, descending toward Akris. Dergen's heart pounded in its chest. The hatchling had never seen a ship like this before. It was large, metallic, and sleek, and it glowed with the energy of advanced technology. It was not of Akris. Dergen single quotes s mind raced. Could this be the ship of its family? Or was it something entirely different? The last thing Dergen wanted was for Eli to be caught in something dangerous. The hatchling looked at the small human, who was holding onto its hand tightly. Looking up at the descending ship with wide eyes, Eli, Dergen thought, trying to communicate. "We have to go. Quickly." The human, sensing the urgency in Dergen's thoughts, nodded. But confusion was still written on his face. He didn't know what was happening, but he trusted the hatchling. Together, they ran toward the closest shelter, a crumbling building nearby, hoping to find safety. As the ship landed with a loud thud, the ground shook once more. Dergen and Eli hid in the shadows, hearts pounding, watching as the ship's doors opened. The hatchling's mind was racing. Whatever was about to happen, it knew one thing for sure. The world of Akris was about to change again. And for the first time in its life, Dergen wasn't alone. The ship landed with a thunderous sound that echoed through the ruins of the city, sending dust into the air and shaking the ground beneath Dergen's feet. The hatchling could feel the vibrations in its bones, a sensation that sent a chill through its body. It crouched low behind the broken walls, its glowing skin dimming in the shadows. Eli, who had followed Dergen closely, looked up at the ship with wide, curious eyes. He was trembling slightly, though he tried to hide it behind a brave face. Dergen's heart raced. It didn't know what this ship meant. Was it here to help? Or was it another part of the world that Dergen had longed to escape, something unknown and dangerous? The hatchling couldn't risk anything happening to Eli. Not now when they had just begun to understand each other. Dergen had already lost so much. It could not lose this newfound friendship. The ship's doors slowly opened, releasing a soft hum of energy that echoed across the clearing. A light shone from inside the craft, bright and steady. Dergen's eyes narrowed. It was impossible to tell who or what was inside. The hatchling's mind raced with thoughts. Should they stay hidden? Should they run? There was no time to make a decision. The figures inside the ship began to step out. The first to appear were tall, humanoid figures, their skin shimmering in shades of silver and blue, much like Dergen's own. But unlike Dergen, they didn't have the soft glow of youth. Their bodies were hardened, their eyes cold and calculating. They were Chrysians, but not like the hatchlings Dergen had seen before. These beings were older, their faces stern and full of authority. Dergen felt a deep sense of unease, its instincts warning it that these Acrisians were not like the family it had once known. These were leaders, commanders of a race that had lost its warmth. Behind the commanders, smaller ships began to land, their engines cutting off with a sharp hiss. More Acrisians emerged, their movements stiff and controlled. Dergen's heart sank. These beings were not interested in playing or exploring the world. They were here on a mission. Eli looked up at Dergen, his face filled with questions. The hatchling glanced down at the small human, trying to calm its racing thoughts. Dergen reached down and gently placed a hand on Ellie's shoulder, a silent promise to protect him. The commanders of the ship gathered in the center, speaking in a language Dergen couldn't understand. But even without words, the hatchling could feel the tension in the air. There was no warmth in their voices, only commands. The Acrisians were here for something, and Dergen feared it had something to do with the long-lost signal that had awakened the ship. As Dergen crouched lower behind the broken walls, a deep voice from the group of commanders echoed through the clearing. One of them stepped forward, taller than the rest, his eyes scanning the area. He spoke to the others, his words sharp and commanding. Dergen could not understand the language, but it could feel the cold authority in the tone. The Acrisians were looking for something or someone, and Dergen had a sinking feeling it was looking right at them. The tall commander turned his gaze toward Dergen's hiding place. For a moment, their eyes locked. Dergen felt the weight of the gaze on its skin, the coldness piercing its thoughts. It was as if the commander could see through the walls, through the ruins, directly to where Dergen and Eli were hiding. The hatchling's heart skipped a beat, and it instinctively pulled Eli closer. Shielding the small human behind its body, the commander nodded to another Acrisian, who immediately moved toward the spot where Dergen and Eli were hidden. Dergen's mind raced. There was no way to outrun them, not with their advanced technology. But perhaps there was another way. Eli, sensing the tension, grabbed Dergen's hand. "What's happening?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Dergen's eyes softened as it looked down at the boy. It didn't have the words to explain, but it hoped Eli could understand the feelings behind its glowing skin. Together, they were a team now, and Dergen would do whatever it took to protect the human. The Acrisians were getting closer. Dergen's mind raced, searching for an escape. The hatchling's powers were strong, but not strong enough to face an entire group of armed Acrisians. But there was one thing that might help its ability to manipulate light. It had never tried to do anything this risky before, but it had to act now. With a deep breath, Dergen focused. Its skin began to glow brighter, sending pulses of light into the air. It wasn't enough to be seen from a distance, but it created a shimmering shield of energy around them, a cloak of light that blended with the surroundings. The hatchling took a step forward, pulling Eli along with it. "Follow me," Dergen thought, communicating as best as it could. It hoped the human understood. Eli, holding onto Dergen's hand tightly, nodded. They both moved through the ruins, silently and quickly, their bodies hidden by the shimmering cloak of light. The Acrisians, still distracted by their search, didn't notice the two slipping away. Dergen led Eli through the maze of broken buildings, its glowing skin dimming just enough to blend in with the surroundings. The hatchling's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the urgency of the situation. They had to get to safety before the Acrisians discovered them. As they moved through the ruins, Eli glanced up at Dergen, his face full of questions. "Where are we going?" he asked quietly. Dergen's mind flashed with an answer, though it had no words to give. It knew of a place, a hidden chamber deep within the ruins where Dergen had once found peace. A place where the Acrisians would not easily reach. It was the perfect hiding spot. "Keep close," Dergen thought. The human nodded again, his small hand clutching Dergen's tightly. The hatchling moved faster, weaving through the ruins with a speed and grace only it could manage. They reached a narrow alleyway between two towering walls of ancient stone. The air smelled of dust and decay, but the narrow path was perfect for hiding. Dergen's light flickered slightly as they turned the corner, but it steadied once more. The hatchling could hear the faint sound of footsteps behind them. and the faint hum of accretion technology in the distance. The Acrisians were still searching, but Dergen and Eli were out of sight for now. The hatchling stopped for a moment, peeking round the corner. The glowing shapes of the Acrisians were still moving about the ruins, but they seemed unaware of where Dergen had gone. For now, they were safe. Dergen turned to Eli and crouched down, making sure the human was all right. "We're okay," Dergen thought, the words unspoken but clear in the soft glow of its skin. Eli looked up, his face full of trust and understanding. "We'll be okay," Eli whispered back. And in that moment, Dergen knew that it would protect the human at all costs. The arrival of the Acrisians was only the beginning. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Dergen didn't feel so alone. Together, they would face whatever came next no matter what. Dergen crouched in the shadow of the ancient stone wall, its heart still racing from the narrow escape. The glowing light of its body flickered dimly, hiding them from view as they waited. Eli was close, his small hand gripping Dergen's with surprising strength. Though the little human had no idea what was going on, Dergen could feel his trust. It was a strange feeling, a bond that had only just begun but already seemed unbreakable. The Acrisians were still out there. Their footsteps echoed through the ruins, a steady beat that sent shivers down Dergen's spine. But for now, they were safe. The hatchling's mind raced. What did the Acrisians want? Why had they come to Akris after so many years? And why had they found the signal that had awakened the long-forgotten technologies of this world? The ship they had seen earlier remained on the outskirts of the city, its engines humming softly in the background. The Acrisians had settled into the ruins, their search more methodical now. It was clear they were looking for something important. Dergen couldn't help but wonder, were they searching for the hatchling? Or for something else entirely? Eli tugged gently on Dergen's hand, pulling the hatchling's attention away from the distant searchers. Dergen glanced down at the human, whose face was filled with questions the hatchling didn't have the answers to. "What's going to happen now?" Eli whispered, his voice soft, yet steady. Dergen could feel the weight of his words. Eli had no idea what they were up against, but there was no fear in his eyes, only curiosity. Dergen thought for a moment, then knelt down so that it was at eye level with Eli. The hatchling's soft, glowing skin dimmed to a gentle light. It couldn't speak the same language as Eli, but it could show the human how it felt. With a deep breath, Dergen focused its energy and projected a vision of the distant stars. Swirling in the void of space, the light danced in the air, creating shapes that Eli could see. It wasn't much, but it was all Dergen could offer. "Are we going to be okay?" Eli asked, his voice barely a whisper. The question hung in the air, and Dergen could feel its own uncertainty for the first time. It wasn't sure how things would turn out. The Acrisians were a powerful species, and their arrival meant something had changed. But Dergen didn't have the answers. It could only hope that the bond it shared with Eli would be enough to protect them both. For a long time, they stayed hidden, crouched in the shadow of the ruins. Dergen knew they couldn't stay there forever. The Acrisians would eventually find them. But as Dergen and Eli sat in the quiet, something new began to stir inside the hatchling, something that it had never felt before, a deep, unshakable desire to protect the small human beside it. Dergen had always been alone, wandering the empty city, but now it had a purpose. And that purpose was to keep Eli safe. Eli, for his part, seemed to sense the change. His hand tightened around Dergen's, and he gave the hatchling a small, determined smile. The child didn't have the powers Dergen possessed, but there was something about his presence that made Dergen feel stronger. In that moment, Dergen realized that they weren't just beings trapped in a forgotten city. They were something more. Together, they were a family. The next few days were filled with a strange mix of fear and hope. They had to stay hidden, moving only when the Acrisians were far enough away. The hatchling used its powers to guide them through the darkened streets, weaving through the ruins and finding hidden paths that even the Acrisians couldn't detect. As the days passed, Dergen began to notice something strange. The Acrisians, despite their power and technology, didn't seem interested in searching the entire city. Instead, they focused on the areas near the old spaceport and the central energy chambers. It was almost as if they were looking for something specific, something that only they could understand. Dergen wondered if they had found what they were looking for. And if they had, what would that mean for the future of Akris? Would the Acrisians simply take what they wanted and leave? Or would they try to reclaim the entire planet? One evening, as Dergen and Eli sat in a small, hidden alcove, the hatchling felt something shift in the air. The subtle hum of the Acrisians' technology was louder than usual. It was as if they were preparing for something. Dergen's glowing skin flickered in response to the change. Eli looked up at the hatchling, sensing the change as well. "What's happening?" Eli asked, his voice tense with worry. Dergen paused, then slowly extended its hand toward the human. The warmth of its glow spreading to Ellie's skin. The light pulsed softly, offering comfort in the face of the uncertainty that surrounded them. It was as if the hatchling was trying to tell Eli that no matter what came next, they would face it together. "We'll be okay," Dergen thought, the message clear in his mind. Eli gave a small, hesitant nod, but the worry never fully left his face. He was too young to fully understand the situation. But Dergen could see the strength in him. Despite his fear, the human was not running. He had chosen to stay, to face the unknown alongside the hatchling. Dergen knew then that Eli wasn't just a companion. He had become a part of Dergen's family, something the hatchling had never had before. Family wasn't just about blood or species. It was about the connections we choose, the bonds we build with others. And in this moment, Dergen realized that it had found something precious, something worth protecting. The hatchling's mind wandered back to the day it had first found Eli. The small human had been lost and confused, but he had never once shown fear toward Dergen. In those first moments, they had been two strangers in an unfamiliar world. But now, they were something more. They were a team, a family, bound not by blood but by something even stronger, trust. Eli was the first person to ever treat Dergen like a friend, not an outcast. And Dergen had learned from the human that friendship, that family, wasn't something that could be taken away, no matter what the Acrisians wanted. Dergen would fight to keep this connection alive. As the days wore on, Dergen began to feel a sense of hope rising within. It wasn't just the fear of the Acrisians that had filled the hatchling's heart now. It was the hope that perhaps this world, this lonely city, could be something more. With Eli by its side, Dergen began to believe that together they could face whatever the future held. They might not know what the Acrisians were planning or what challenges awaited them, but Dergen was certain of one thing: no matter what happened, they would face it together. And that was enough. The city of Akris had always been quiet, its empty streets and silent buildings a reminder of the long-lost civilization that once called it home. But now, as Dergen and Eli sat in the shadows of the crumbling city, the air was thick with tension. The Acrisians were everywhere searching the ruins, their eyes scanning for something important. The ship they had arrived in still loomed on the horizon, its engines humming softly as if waiting for something to happen. Dergen and Eli had been hiding for days, slipping through the city's maze of ancient streets, always one step ahead of the Acrisians. The hatchling's powers, its ability to blend into the surroundings, to manipulate light, had kept them safe. But the sense of danger never truly left. The Acrisians were relentless. They were searching for something, and Dergen had a terrible feeling that whatever it was, it would change everything. Eli had grown quiet in the past few days, his usual bright energy dimmed by the uncertainty of their situation. He would ask questions, of course, about the Acrisians, about the city, about what would happen next, but Dergen didn't have the answers. The hatchling had never felt so powerless. For all its strength and abilities, there was little it could do against the advanced technology and unyielding will of the Acrisians. But then, one morning, something unexpected happened. Dergen had been resting in a small, hidden alcove, its glowing skin dimmed to blend in with the shadows. Eli sat next to the hatchling, his legs crossed, his head resting against the stone wall. The city felt quieter than usual, and for a moment, Dergen allowed itself to relax. The human boy was there, and that alone brought a sense of peace. For the first time since they had met, the two of them were safe. Ellie's voice broke the silence. "Do you think we'll ever be able to leave this place?" he asked softly, his voice full of longing. Dergen looked down at him, its glowing eyes reflecting the concern in the human's face. The hatchling didn't know how to answer. The city of Akris had once been full of life, but now it felt like a ghost town abandoned, forgotten, and left to crumble. The Acrisians had come to claim it, but their presence felt cold and imposing, like a reminder of everything that had been lost. "We'll leave when it's time," Dergen thought, projecting the feeling of calm it wanted Eli to feel. Eli looked up at Dergen, offering a small smile. He didn't fully understand, but he seemed to trust the hatchling's words. It was a quiet moment, but in that silence, Dergen felt something stirring, something deep inside it. This was more than just about survival. This was about hope. Suddenly, the distant sound of engines hummed through the air. Dergen stiffened. The Acrisians were getting closer. They had been growing more organized, more focused. Their search was reaching its peak. It wouldn't be long before they found them. The hatchling gently pulled Eli to his feet, its glowing skin flaring bright as it shielded the human with its own body. The Acrisians would not find them today. They couldn't. As Dergen moved, a plan began to form in its mind, a plan to confront the Acrisians, to take a stand and fight for their place in this world. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about standing up to the unknown, about proving that even the smallest of beings could make a difference. Dergen led Eli through the ruins, moving quickly and quietly, staying in the shadows. They reached the center of the city, where the Acrisians had set up camp. The air was thick with tension as the soldiers moved in and out of the ships, their eyes scanning the streets for signs of movement. Dergen knew that if they were going to do this, it had to be now. The hatchling concentrated, focusing all of its energy into its light manipulation abilities. Its body shimmered, glowing brighter than ever before. It was time to show the Acrisians that the city of Akris wasn't abandoned. It wasn't just a forgotten place. It was home, and Dergen would fight to protect it. The ground beneath Dergen's feet shook as a beam of bright light shot up into the sky, bursting like a star from the hatchling's body. The light spread out, filling the streets with a dazzling glow that could be seen from miles away. The Acrisians stopped in their tracks, their eyes widening in shock as the light enveloped the city. For the first time, the Acrisians were confronted with something they had not anticipated. A message, a challenge, a symbol of defiance. The beam of light pulsed, changing colors and shapes. A clear sign of Dergen's power. The Acrisians began to move toward it, their curiosity and caution mixed. They had underestimated Dergen, just as they had underestimated the spirit of the planet itself. And then, as the light continued to pulse, Dergen did something it had never done before. It reached out to the other Acrisians. The hatchling's mind extended, sending a wave of thought across the city, connecting with the few remaining members of its kind. "We are still here. Akris is not lost. You have forgotten what it means to be a Acrisian. But I remember." The message resonated in the minds of the Acrisians, and for the first time, the cold, distant leaders of the species paused. They turned to look at each other, confusion written across their faces. They had come to reclaim the planet, to dominate it, but they hadn't come for this. It wasn't a show of power. It wasn't a weapon. It was a message of hope, a call to remember. Eli stood beside Dergen, watching in awe as the light filled the air. The human didn't understand the full meaning, but he knew one thing for sure. The hatchling was no longer alone, and neither was he. The Acrisians, still hesitant, gathered at the edge of the light, unsure of what to do. The leader of the group, the same one who had locked eyes with Dergen days earlier, stepped forward. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his gaze that softened when he looked at the hatchling. Finally, he spoke in a language Dergen understood. "You are not lost," the Acrisian leader said, his voice low but clear. "But the world we once knew is gone." Dergen did not respond with words. It simply let the light continue to pulse, a reminder of what had been, and what could still be. A new dawn was rising over Akris, one that didn't belong to the Acrisians alone. It belonged to everyone, and for the first time in a long while, Dergen felt that it had found its place in the universe, not as an outcast, but as part of something bigger. Eli, standing beside the hatchling, smiled up at Dergen. The bond between them was unspoken but undeniable. They were family now, united not by species, but by something deeper, something that could never be taken away. The Acrisians began to understand. Their mission was not to reclaim what had been lost. It was to rebuild, to learn from the past, and to create something new. Together, they could restore Akris, but not by force, by unity. By connection. As the light faded, a sense of peace settled over the city. The threat of the Acrisians was still there, but now it was different. They weren't here to take any more. They were here to understand. And in that moment, Dergen knew that whatever the future held, it wouldn't be faced alone. Eli had become more than a companion. He was a partner, a friend, and now a part of Dergen's new family. Together, they had made their stand, and the world of Akris was just beginning to heal.